Hello everyone, this is foxypapasmurf, or FPS Gamer for short, and today we're talking Infection. Specifically, we're talking about the design theory behind Forge-made Infection maps. I'm joined by community forger MultiLockOn, who has created some truly great Forge spectacles in the past, and has valuable input to share on the subject.
Hey guys, I'm MultiLockOn, and I run my own YouTube channel where I specialize in teaching level design in regards to Halo. FPS Gamer was kind enough to share this video with me where we will be discussing how to design maps around the new upcoming game type, Infection.
I will preface everything that is going to be stated from here on out by openly acknowledging that design theory, through the scope of Infection, is very much a subjective topic. Highly competitive arena maps have been tried and tested for over 15 years now. We know what works, and we know what does not work.
And like many other areas of level design, everything we're about to cover could easily be disregarded completely, and you might still come out with a great experience. Infection has many faces in popular settings such as linear infection or tower defense, so on, so I'll be covering what it means to build maps for traditional Infection, which means free roam.
Although forgers are entitled to create whatever their hearts desire, if a map is going to be labeled as competitive or arena style, there are basic rules that should be followed that will help the map perform objectively better. Forging an Infection map, however, does not ascribe to the same methodology that traditional arena maps do. Maps created for core game types do not have to provide any particular setting to perform well. While engaging scenery in a subjectively beautiful skybox can certainly enrich an arena map, it is not necessary in a largely competitive scope. Infection is an entirely different beast. For the most part, Infection is a highly social game type, with less focus placed on map design and more emphasis given on the overall experience and immersion that the map provides.
All things considered, Infection is not a hyper-competitive game type, so don't get caught up in all the technicalities and rules in creating an Infection map, because realistically there is not nearly as much to take in mind when forging for Infection as there is, traditional 2v2, 4v4 maps. Now, don't get your panties in a wad by me saying this. I know there's a lot of forgers who more or less exclusively do Infection, and some of them like to boast, it's just as hard to make Infection as it is anything else. No, not really, and that's okay. Infection doesn't need to be this highly complex and deeply strategic game mode, because that's not why it's popular. In fact, the whole concept of Infection is that it's inherently unbalanced. One team only has melee weapons and the other team has guns, and the two teams are constantly swapping players. Once you accept Infection for what it is, which is an awesome experience with the potential for awesome themes around it, you can create an incredible journey for players to go on.
The setting provides the stage for the carnage that is likely to ensue. Typically, Infection maps are dark, dingy, overgrown, or desolate. They give the game a sense of narrative that immerses the player into a story that is actively being told. That being said, there are several guidelines that, if kept in mind during the forging process, can help create a superb Infection experience. To exemplify the points we will be discussing, it may be beneficial to briefly cover the history of Infection in order to provide some context. Rewind back a decade. The online multiplayer scene for consoles was just getting traction. Developers did not yet have a grasp on the flexibility that downloadable content had to offer. Today, massive day one updates and monthly patches are commonplace. In the era of the 6th generation console, games were released as is, and rarely were updates pushed out to the masses by means of an internet connection. When developers did release content, it was usually in the form of a physical disc that had to be purchased at a brick-and-mortar store. This was the case midway through the life cycle of the much-beloved Halo 2. The game survived 3 years as Bungie's golden child without ever receiving an additional game type. No matter how remarkable the multiplayer was, 3 years of the same game types makes the arena feel stale. It was this static environment that caused the community to create some custom honor rules game types. Infection, or Zombies as it was previously known, was one such game. The rules were simple. There was a red team and a green team. Red team could use a shotgun and a pistol, green team could use only the sword. If you were a red player and were killed by a green player, you switched over to the green team. This progressed until all players were converted to the green team, or the red team survived until the end of a round. This was easy to understand and gained mass popularity within the community, so much so that Bungie decided to make it a dedicated game type with the launch of Halo 3. As mentioned previously, Infection plays differently than any other game type. As such, the developer maps for Halo 3 had to be modified extensively to ensure that they function with the infection mechanics. This was made easy with the advent of the map editing tool, Forge.
So think of it like this. If Infection launched in Halo 5 with these like incredibly thematic maps, I mean spooky forests or broken down like abandoned hospitals, an overgrown city, but it lacked a scoring system, meaning that you didn't get points for surviving, you didn't get points for getting kills, do you think Infection all of a sudden would not be popular? Of course not, because that's never what it's been about. It's not been about the points and the scoring. I mean, if we received proper developer-themed Infection maps akin to the ones you see in like Nazi Zombies, Infection would be more popular than ever, whether or not there was a scoring system, okay? Now imagine if Infection had the perfect scoring system that took into account your kills, how long you survived, clutch plays, team assists, but it was treated like any other Slayer mode, meaning that you just played it on unthemed kind of blank maps that were just blockouts. There was no infected like multiplayer announcer, nothing like that. It was just Slayer where one team had swords and then they would kill someone and they'd swap teams. That would not be taken kindly. Now, don't confuse a lack of competitive viability with a lack of balance, okay? Everything needs balance. Luckily with Infection that comes down to more or less a single factor, so balancing is relatively simple. It's really just down to line of sights, and I mean zombies have energy swords and then swords are close quarters, so if your zombies are having trouble infecting humans, you just need to really cut the line of sights and you should be good to go.
Looking at how the developers modified many of the Halo 3 original maps provides some insight on how an Infection map should be structured. It is important to keep in mind, however, that there are several Infection game types, and each one plays a little bit different. As such, maps will need to be playtested extensively. Either a map needs to be flexible enough to work with all of them, or the creator needs to acknowledge that the map may be only playable with one or two. Halo 5 Infection releases with the Memories of Reach update, with a modified version of Classic Infection. Notably, all Spartan abilities remain for both infected and non-infected players, with the exception of Sprint, Spartan Charge, and Ground Pound being disabled for the infected. The base movement speed and jump height of the infected is increased. Human players begin the match with shotgun and AR starts, with other weapons being placed around the map. Although just a single game type is available at launch, it is likely that more game types will follow in the future. For the majority of these examples, we will be running with two assumptions that will cover most, if not all, game types. 1. Infected have a single, close-range weapon with a modest speed and jump height advantage. 2. Humans, although slower and less agile, have potential access to weapons of all effective ranges. With these known factors in mind, an Infection map can begin to take shape. The biggest difference between Infection and traditional arena maps, aside from the more weighted emphasis on ambiance, are sightlines. For the most part, core maps do not provide sufficient cover to make for a balanced game of Infection. Infected are only lethal at short range, and if there are wide open basins or long hallways throughout the map, the Infected have no chance of reaching the human players. Of course, on the flip side, providing too many sightline blockers will obviously give the Infected a much stronger advantage. Secondly, holdout locations are crucial to giving the human players a sense of desperation. There's nothing like being trapped in a room with one or two buddies while a barrage of Infected line up outside. The small group knows they won't survive this final wave, but with the timer ticking down, there's a chance that they can survive just long enough to outlast the round. No other game type provides this same terrifying, heart-pounding sense of urgency. Holdouts make that situation possible. Additionally, the added speed and jump height of an infected player should also be considered when scaling the map. This is also a great opportunity to take advantage of infected-only routes or jump-ups inaccessible by human players. This could also potentially cause problems with player containment, so mess around on the map with the infected settings on to make sure that your player containment methods are sufficient. Spawning is another important aspect that can potentially ruin a great map if not executed correctly. Each team should have plenty of initial spawn points, but only the infected should have a large number of respawn points. That being said, a couple human respawn points are a good idea for map testing purposes and in the event of suicides or betrayals. The spawning patterns will vary widely depending on the style of map, but can reasonably be broken down into two groups: infield spawning and outfield spawning. Infield is largely similar to traditional Slayer maps in that both sides spawn inside the playable area of a map. Make sure that the infected spawns aren't too exposed or close to holdout locations. Outfield spawning, on the other hand, provides a safe area for infected players to spawn outside of the actual playspace. This can deliver interesting encounters where the infected can organize themselves and decide where to breach the playable area, instead of being randomly spawned into a potentially dangerous situation or being killed before getting an opportunity to group with other infected. While this spawning method is admittedly interesting and generally more strategic, it can also cause potential issues. Human players may reach the infected spawn location and then have an impossible advantage. If this is the desired method, test the map vigorously to ensure that no human players can escape. We'll mention weapon placement here briefly, but this category, more than the others, is largely dependent on the game type settings. Suffice it to say that sightlines may need some massaging if you intend to populate the map with medium to long range weaponry.
Obviously, there's always room to play with weapon placement and how much ammo they have and the little details like that, but that's also relatively simple to balance, so I'm not going to go into it. Also, making it genuinely fun to play as a zombie completely depends on your ability to vary encounters for them, so do your best to create interesting angles and entrances for where the zombies can interact with humans from.
While the list of do's in an infection map are somewhat vague and should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, the list of don'ts is a little more tangible. The snowball effect, for example, is a metric that can be easily monitored. As it pertains to infection, the snowball effect is the rate at which the human players convert to infected. Generally, the first kill by the infected doesn't happen immediately. The humans outnumber the infected and are grouped together at the beginning of the match. However, as the humans spread out and get potentially careless, an infected should eventually begin to recruit members into his undead army. As more players become infected, fewer are left to defend and the game begins to snowball. If balanced correctly, the match should generally end half the time with an infected takeover and about half the time with at least one human player remaining. This consistently delivers a fun experience for both sides. If the sightlines are too long and the holdout locations are too powerful, the infected will have a hard time reaching and killing human players. This will delay the turning point too late into the round. It will make the game boring for the humans and frustrating for the infected. Of course, if the sightlines are too short and human players have nowhere to hide, the infected will quickly overpower them and that point of inflection will come too soon. While on the topic of holdout locations, it is important to ensure that no single location is all-powerful. Again, this depends greatly on the style of map, but generally you want to provide the human players with multiple locations where they can potentially hide.
I've seen a lot of prominent infection designers talk about how humans should be able to flip-flop from holdout to holdout on a whim and keep moving so that the game stays interesting. Personally, I think that if a human is consistently moving from holdout to holdout throughout the round, it just means that the decision-making doesn't really matter at any point because changing bunkers is primitive and unpunishing. I've always felt that the most interesting thing you can do with an infection map is right off the bat in the starting seconds of a match, force humans to make a decision as to where they want to go and how they want to play the round. I feel like it makes the decision-making aspect of the game that much more interesting. This way, near the end of the round, when you're holed up and there's zombies, flooding in every window, you're thinking like, damn, I wonder how the other humans are doing over at the opposite bunker. Maybe I should have gone that way. That way the journey to switch locations is really perilous, it's nerve-wracking, as it should be, and you can really look forward to the reset and how you're going to adjust your strategy accordingly. I think it gives the maps a lot more character, a lot more replayability, than a map where humans are kind of brainlessly walking from area to area.
Like other game modes, players often utilize different strategies. While some may only care for attaining the most kills, others find the game more rewarding when they last an entire round without being infected, regardless of how many kills they attain. The map shouldn't force players to use just one strategy. It should offer locations for those who want to kill infected at the expense of being exposed, and also locations for those who want to be secure at the expense of not getting many kills. Most players fall somewhere in between, and the map should reflect this behavior. As mentioned at the beginning, infection maps are more about the immersion than anything else. Convincing the players that they are part of this active storyline helps create a rewarding experience. Sources of inspiration can come from horror stories, movies, TV shows, other video games, or even music. With the flexibility of the Halo 5 Forge tool, players have the means to create some truly impressive play spaces. While the setting is important, it is imperative that this is balanced with the piece count, lighting budget, and frame rate performance. This, coupled with the tips and guidelines previously mentioned, will give you a great starting point to design your own amazing creation. Again, nothing we have stated is definitive. These are the opinions of two humble forgers with experience to share with others. Do with it what you will, but most importantly, have fun and don't get discouraged. Even if you're new to Forge, you likely have something to share that no one else does. No single person has all the answers or knows what's best in every scenario, despite what you may hear. Thanks for tuning in. Please check out MultiLockOn's channel here or in the video description. He has some other design talk videos that are very informative and provide a great amount of insight.
And that's it. Do your best to create an awesome theme that pulls players in and provides a memorable experience. Don't get caught up on the technical side. Just create your journey and go on it. Special thanks to FPS gamer foxypapasmurf for allowing me to appear on his channel.
Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.